It's been a while since I've even thought of this story, but recent events reminded me of it pretty sharply. I only heard it secondhand and a fair while ago, so I can't promise that all the details are exactly correct. I should say, too, that I was fairly skeptical the first time I heard this. I'm not superstitious by any means. The friend who told me was the same, but even so, he made me swear up and down never to retell this. His grandfather did the same to him. This is the first time I've actually told it, and I'm only doing it now because it's online. There is one major change here from the story my friend told, and it's intentional. I'm not going to include the creature's proper name. It should be pretty clear why by the end. But I'm taking that to my grave. This story was told to my friend by his grandfather, and he told it to me around the fire when we were camping one time. Like I said, I laughed it off at the time, but recent events have definitely changed my mind on that. My friend's grandfather, who I'll call John for privacy reasons, was a civil engineer working in Australia. In 1950, he was working out in the bush with a local Aboriginal town, trying to somehow connect the town up with power and a telephone connection. The town was called Naguran, Wild Dog Creek, and John was the only white man there at the time. He was pretty well liked there and was treated as one of the locals by pretty much everyone. He spent most of his time fishing and hunting and waiting for the government to hook up power lines. By his account, it was the happiest time of his life. One night, though, one of the local farmers lost a cow. Nothing particularly odd there. It wasn't called Naguran for nothing. The wild dogs carried off animals now and then. Not usually full-grown cattle, sure, but it wasn't unheard of. The reason the farmer even bothered reporting it was the strange way he'd found it. The thing's skeleton was found on the edge of his field, and a set of tracks leading to and then away from it. Not dog tracks, he said, but human tracks, and the tracks of a cripple to boot. How did he know that? John wanted to know. The man said the steps on one side were much longer than the other. Well, that got the town elders' attention, and they went out with him to have a look. John tagged along out of curiosity, but the tracks raised more questions than they answered. The farmer was right about the difference in length, but even the short side looked twice as long as an ordinary person's step. When the elders saw this, they grabbed John and the farmer and towed them both away. They ordered the farmer to forget about that field and those cattle, that they were now an offering. He would be given new fields and new animals, but he was never to go back there again. The farmer accepted without comment and was given new land on the other side of the town. A week later, though, another cow was found in the same way. This time, the elders forbade anyone from going near the site. The whole town got together and shifted all the cattle to a place about an hour away from town. By this point, John was confused as hell, and more than a little scared. He asked the elders, but they refused to explain. It was only from questioning a few drunk locals later on that he heard about the Skintakers. The Skintakers were, said to locals, evil creatures which roamed the forest at night. The huge, deformed creatures were born without a skin and had to make one, stitching it together from the hides of their victims. They told him that he was never to mention the proper name of the Skintakers again. They hated stories being told about them, hated potential prey being warned. Saying the name drew them, the locals said. Then they went quiet, maybe realizing that they'd said too much, and John couldn't get anything more out of them for the rest of the night. In the morning, a dog's skeleton was found on the outskirts of the town. The strange tracks could be clearly seen outside the fence, coming out of the bush, then back in again. This time, the elders came to John. He was to leave, they said, although at first they wouldn't explain why. Eventually, with great reluctance, they told him that the town was in trouble. None of the locals had a chance, but maybe John could make it if he left now. John didn't really believe this, but he knew when he wasn't wanted. So without further ado, he left. On his way out of the town, he realized he had left a bunch of his tools in his house. He turned around to get them, but one of the elders grabbed a spear from another man and threw it at him. He got the message. He turned away and started off into the bush. It took him the whole day to reach the road. He knew he was there by the sound of a car approaching. It made for a nice change to the rhythms of the forest. A familiar sound amid the strange noises. The sound of the birds and the running creek were all right, but the branches thumping and the wind got annoying after a day of hearing it. Regular and rhythmic, it was like someone was using his head as a drum. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Over and over until he was well and truly sick of it, seeming to get louder and louder as time went on. The car drowned the noise out though, thankfully. He stepped out into the road and saw the sun setting over the horizon. From the other direction, he saw a car coming and tried to thumb a lift from the driver. The guy behind the wheel didn't slow down though. Instead, he sped up, car revving to the maximum. Well, John wasn't going to spend a night in the woods with that noise going through his head, so he stepped out in front of the car. The driver slammed on his brakes and opened the door. John stepped around to get in, but the man shouted at him to get in, panic edging his voice. He jumped in, and before he even got the door closed, the car was off, redlining the engine. A kangaroo almost got whacked into the side of the car, probably startled out by the engine noise. The animal only just missed the rear fender, coming close enough for him to see the flash of the red taillights off its eyes in the mirror. The driver didn't take his foot off the gas until they were well beyond the edge of the bush. John didn't think the guy would stop at all, except that he got pulled over by a cop. The guy barely seemed to notice the policeman handing him a ticket. He just sat staring in the rearview mirror, seemingly waiting for something. By this point, John was fairly sure the guy was either insane or on drugs, and he asked the cop for a ride. The cop dropped John at the nearest town, and from there he organized his trip out of there. A couple of years later, he came across an Aboriginal man in the supermarket who didn't speak much English. He was delighted to find that he could understand the guy. He translated for him, then got to talking. It seemed the man was from the town the cop dropped John in. Hearing the name jogged his memory, and he told the man the story of his time in Naguran, although he left out the journey home, not quite sure he hadn't dreamed the car ride. The man gave him a funny look and asked him to repeat the name of the town he had stayed in. Naguran, he told him, and the man shook his head. Apparently, the town was gone. No one from there had been heard from in years. The two compared notes, and it seemed like the last message out of there was a couple of days before John's departure. The man asked John if he knew what happened, and he said no. He wasn't about to go telling ghost stories to strangers in the supermarket. Later that night, though, John had a dream. In it, he heard a beat that he recognized after a moment as the sound of branches in the forest thumping in the wind. He stood over a field of mud and saw in the ground those strange tracks. Still, the beating went on. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Long, then short, repeated over and over again. Like a drum, he thought, or more, perhaps like steps. Great, uneven, inhuman steps. One long, one short. Steps taken maybe by a creature as big as a deer, with red, shining eyes. A creature on the hunt for human meat, and for a skin to add to its cloak. He knew then what the seemingly crazy driver in the car had seen, why he had sped up. If he had looked behind him, he too would have seen the red, glowing eyes, coming for him at a run faster than any human could have managed. John said that he had considered going back to the town for a while, but after that dream, he didn't bother. There would be nothing there to find. Naguran was gone. By now, probably, the last of their skins had fallen from the Skintakers' cloak. Not long after he told me the story, my friend reported that his grandfather had died. He had been out in his brick bush hut and wandered off a track and disappeared, the police said. Maybe the Skintaker got him, my friend joked, and at the time it was just a bit of black humor, taking us back to the good old days. A couple of days ago, though, I saw a familiar name in the obituary sections of the local paper. I rang up my friend's family to offer my condolences, and in the course of the conversation, I asked idly how he had died. Apparently, he had been out hunting and had walked off a trail and vanished. That set alarm bells ringing in my head. A grandfather and grandson dead in almost exactly the same circumstances? That's on the outer edge of coincidence. Not only that, both of them were skilled woodsmen. I'd seen both of them at separate times go into the bush with a gun and a compass and come out 2 weeks later having gone straight through totally unmarked forest. There is no way that both of them walked off tracks and disappeared, not in forest they knew that well. I didn't say any of that to the family, and of course not to the police. The official story is that they're lost, and I'm happy for it to stay that way. I'm not even sure that it's wrong. If I had to guess though, I'd say the last thing either of them heard was a strange, uneven thumping gait. And if there'd been a good enough tracker near the spot, they would have seen a trail heading off into the bush. A trail of uneven yet impossibly long steps, bounding off into the trees. Somehow my friend's joke when John died doesn't seem nearly so funny. Like I said, I'm never telling anyone else this. I don't really need my family and friends thinking I've lost my mind. I just wanted to put it somewhere though. Maybe if someone turns up my name on a missing persons list, it won't be such a mystery. I've never said the name, but who knows? Maybe hearing it is enough? I damn well hope not.